I knew something was wrong the moment I saw Karen Livingston standing at my driveway with that clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. It was 7 in the morning on a Tuesday in October, and I had just finished loading my Snowplow attachment onto my Ford F-350, getting ready for what meteorologists were predicting would be one of the harshest winters Colorado had seen in decades. "Mr. Foster," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass, "we need to talk about that monstrosity." I glanced at my truck, a perfectly maintained black beauty that I had owned for 5 years. The Snowplow attachment gleamed in the early morning light, freshly painted and ready for action. "Good morning to you too, Karen. What seems to be the problem?" She flipped through her clipboard with manicured nails painted an aggressive shade of red. According to Section 47, subsection C of the Pinewood Heights Homeowners Association bylaws, no commercial vehicles are permitted to park on residential streets or in visible driveways overnight. I leaned against my truck, crossing my arms. "This is not a commercial vehicle. This is my personal truck." "With a Snowplow attachment," she countered, her eyes narrowing behind her designer glasses. "That makes it commercial equipment. I am issuing you a formal warning. The truck must be removed from the property or the attachment must be stored out of sight." The thing was, I had been living in Pinewood Heights for 3 years, and I had been running my snow removal business for 2 of those years. I plowed driveways for elderly neighbors, helped out families who could not afford professional services. And yes, I made some money doing private contracts around Boulder County. But more importantly, I was the only person in our neighborhood who consistently cleared our street when the city plows could not get to us quickly enough. "Karen, be reasonable. We are about to have a major winter season. You have seen how bad the snow gets up here. Last year, we were trapped for 3 days before the city finally cleared our road." "Last year," she said, her voice taking on that condescending tone I had grown to hate, "you did not have that commercial attachment visible from the street. The HOA board has voted, and the decision is final. You have 48 hours to comply, or we will begin issuing daily fines of $200. She turned on her heel and marched back down the driveway, leaving me standing there in disbelief. I had been to every HOA meeting for the past year. There had been no discussion about commercial vehicles, no warning, no debate. They had clearly held a special session without informing the full neighborhood. I pulled out my phone and called my neighbor, Marcus Chen, who lived 3 houses down. "Did you know about any special HOA meeting?" "What? No. When?" Marcus sounded genuinely confused. "Apparently, they passed a new enforcement rule about commercial vehicles. Karen just threatened me with fines if I do not remove my Snowplow." There was a long pause. "Brandon, you are the only reason half of us can get out of our driveways in the winter. What are they thinking? I have no idea, but I am about to find out." I spent the next 2 days diving into the HOA bylaws, reading every single page of the thick document that had been amended 17 times since the neighborhood was built in 2008. Section 47, subsection C did exist, but it had been written to prevent people from running actual commercial operations out of their homes, like having company trucks parked everywhere or running repair shops from their garages. It was never meant to target someone with a Snowplow attachment. I drafted a formal letter to the HOA board, citing case law from Colorado regarding reasonable restrictions and the spirit versus the letter of HOA rules. I delivered it personally to each board member: Karen Livingston, President; Donald Marsh, Vice President; Patricia Young, Treasurer; Gerald Stevens, Secretary; and Linda Martinez, Member at Large. Only Linda seemed sympathetic. She met me at her door with an apologetic expression. "Brandon, I voted against this. I told them it was ridiculous. But Karen has been on a power trip lately, and she somehow convinced the others that your truck was lowering property values." "Lowering property values? How?" Linda shrugged. "She has been talking to a real estate agent friend of hers who apparently said that visible commercial equipment can impact perceived neighborhood quality. It is nonsense, but you know Karen. Once she gets an idea in her head, there is no stopping her." The deadline came and went. I refused to remove my snowplow. On the third day, I received a certified letter informing me that I was being fined $200 per day, effective immediately, and that the fines would continue until I complied with HOA regulations. I consulted with a lawyer, Michael Richardson, who specialized in HOA disputes. His office was in downtown Boulder, a modest space filled with case files and law books. "Here is the situation," Michael said, leaning back in his chair after reviewing my documents. "You can fight this, but it will take time. HOA disputes typically go through arbitration first, and that process can take months. In the meantime, those fines will accumulate. Even if you win, you might be out thousands of dollars before you see any resolution. So what do you recommend?" "Honestly, comply for now, and we will build a case for a bylaw change or a special exception. We can argue that your snowplowing service benefits the community and should be exempt from commercial vehicle restrictions." I did not like it, but I understood the reality. I removed the snowplow attachment and stored it in my garage. The truck itself remained in my driveway, which seemed to satisfy Karen's immediate concerns. October gave way to November, and the temperatures began to drop. The first snow came early that year on November 12th, a light dusting that made everything look like a postcard. By November 20th, we had our first real storm, 6 inches overnight. I watched from my window as neighbors struggled to clear their driveways. Old Mrs. Henderson from across the street stood staring at her snow-covered driveway with a shovel that looked like it weighed more than she did. Marcus was out there with a cheap plastic shovel that cracked halfway through clearing his sidewalk. My fingers itched to attach the plow and help, but I knew Karen was watching. Sure enough, I saw her curtains twitch in her window 2 houses down. She was probably waiting for me to violate the ruling so she could slap me with more fines. The city plows came through around noon, pushing massive walls of snow to the sides of the street and blocking everyone's driveways again. I grabbed a shovel and helped Mrs. Henderson, at least doing what I could manually. It took 2 hours to clear her driveway, and my back was screaming by the end. "Thank you, dear," she said, her breath coming in white puffs. "I do not know what we are going to do this winter without your truck." "We will manage," I said, though I was not convinced. December arrived with a vengeance. The meteorologists had been right. Storm after storm rolled through the Front Range, dumping snow at a rate I had never seen before. The city was overwhelmed, focusing on main roads and emergency routes. Our little neighborhood street in Pinewood Heights was not a priority. The first major storm hit on December 8th. 22 inches in 36 hours. The snow was so heavy that tree branches cracked under the weight, and power lines sagged dangerously low. The city plows did not come at all for the first 2 days. I looked out at the buried street and buried driveways. My truck sat in the garage, the snowplow attachment right beside it, completely useless. I could have cleared the entire neighborhood in 4 hours. Instead, everyone was trapped. Marcus called me, frustration evident in his voice. "This is insane, Brandon. My wife has a doctor's appointment she cannot miss tomorrow. We cannot even get out of our driveway. The snow is up to my knees. I know, I am sorry. My hands are tied. This is Karen's fault, everyone knows it. By day 3, people were getting desperate. Several neighbors tried to band together to shovel the street by hand, but it was an impossible task. The street was 300 yards long and the snow was packed and heavy. They managed to clear about 20 feet before giving up, exhausted. Mrs. Henderson fell on her icy driveway trying to get to her mailbox. Fortunately, she only bruised her hip, but it could have been so much worse. Marcus's wife had to reschedule her appointment. Another neighbor, Tom Bradley, missed 2 days of work because he literally could not get his car out. The city finally plowed our street on day 4, but they only cleared a single lane down the middle, leaving massive berms in front of every driveway. Residents spent hours digging out by hand, and even then, many cars got stuck trying to navigate through the snow. I sent another letter to the HOA board. This one was less formal and more pointed. I explained exactly what was happening, how the community was suffering, and how my truck could solve these problems. I asked them to reconsider their decision, or at least grant a temporary exception during snow emergencies. Karen's response came by email, CC'd to the entire board. The HOA bylaws exist for a reason. Mr. Foster's refusal to comply with reasonable regulations does not constitute an emergency on the part of the association. Residents are reminded that they are responsible for their own snow removal and should plan accordingly. I could not believe what I was reading. The entire neighborhood was suffering, and she was doubling down on her power trip. The complaints started coming in, but not to me. People began showing up at HOA meetings, which were held the first Wednesday of every month. I attended the December meeting, held on the 4th, just before the big storm. About 15 other residents showed up, which was unusual. Normally, these meetings attracted maybe 5 people. Marcus stood up during the open comment period. I want to talk about the commercial vehicle ban. Brandon Foster has been helping this neighborhood for years with snow removal. Why are we preventing him from doing that? Karen shuffled her papers, not looking up. The bylaws are clear, Mr. Chen. We cannot make exceptions for personal friendships or convenience. This is not about convenience, Marcus shot back. This is about safety. This is about elderly residents who cannot shovel their own driveways. This is about people getting to work and medical appointments. Patricia Young, the treasurer, cleared her throat. Perhaps we could table this discussion for the January meeting and research possible bylaw amendments. No, Karen said firmly. The bylaws are fine as written. Mr. Foster knew the rules when he chose to install commercial equipment on his vehicle. He made his choice. The meeting devolved into arguments, with residents on both sides of the issue. Some people agreed with Karen, worried about setting precedents for commercial vehicles. Others were furious, having already experienced the first few small storms of the season. Nothing was resolved. Then came the December 8th storm, and after that, opinions shifted dramatically. The second major storm hit on December 18th, just a week and a half after the first. This one was worse, 28 inches with winds that created drifts up to 5 feet in places. The entire Front Range was paralyzed, businesses closed, schools shut down. The governor declared a state of emergency. Our neighborhood became completely impassable. The city did not even attempt to plow our street for 5 days. We were on our own. People ran out of food. Medicine deliveries could not get through. One neighbor, Jessica Ramirez, was 8 months pregnant and terrified that she might go into labor with no way to get to the hospital. Her husband, David, tried to dig a path to the main road with a shovel and gave up after 3 hours, having cleared maybe 50 feet. I stood in my garage, staring at my truck and the snowplow attachment. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to hook it up and clear the roads. But I knew what would happen. Karen would fine me into oblivion. The HOA could put a lien on my house. I could lose everything, but people were suffering. I called Michael Richardson, my lawyer. What happens if I just do it? If I plow the neighborhood anyway? They will fine you thousands of dollars. They will take you to court. You could end up with a lien on your property, Brandon. I cannot recommend that course of action. And if someone gets hurt, if Jessica goes into labor and cannot get to the hospital, what then? Michael was quiet for a long moment. That is a question of conscience, not law. I cannot answer that for you. I made my decision. On December 20th, at 5 in the morning, I attached the snowplow to my truck and fired up the engine. The sound echoed through the quiet, snow-muffled neighborhood. I started at the top of the street and worked my way down, clearing a full lane in each direction, pushing the snow to the sides where it would not block driveways. It took me 6 hours to do the whole neighborhood properly, including clearing approaches to driveways so people could actually get in and out. When I was finished, our street was more passable than it had been in 2 weeks. People came out of their houses, some of them crying with relief. Mrs. Henderson brought me cookies. Marcus shook my hand so vigorously I thought my arm might fall off. Jessica and David thanked me repeatedly, knowing they now had a clear path if she went into labor. But I knew what was coming. Sure enough, at 9 the next morning, Karen was at my door. Her face was bright red and her hands were shaking with rage. You violated the HOA ruling. You deliberately disobeyed a direct order. People needed help, I said calmly. That is not your decision to make. The board makes those decisions, not you. She was practically screaming now. You are fined $50,000, effective immediately, for flagrant and willful violation of HOA bylaws. $50,000. You cannot be serious. 25 days at $200 per day, which you already owed, plus a $25,000 fine for deliberate violation after receiving written warning. The board will be meeting for an emergency session tomorrow to discuss further action, including possible foreclosure proceedings. She stormed off, leaving me standing there. $50,000. For clearing snow so my neighbors could live their lives. I called Michael immediately. They are threatening foreclosure. On what grounds? $50,000 in fines for violating the commercial vehicle ban. That is excessive and probably unenforceable, but it will still take time to fight. Brandon, this is serious. They cannot actually foreclose over HOA fines without going through a lengthy legal process, but they can make your life hell in the meantime. We need to file a formal response and possibly a countersuit. For what? Harassment, unreasonable enforcement, selective application of bylaws. I would need to research the specifics, but you might have a case. The emergency HOA meeting was held on December 22nd. I was not invited, but Marcus attended and recorded the whole thing on his phone, which was allowed under Colorado's HOA meeting transparency laws. Karen presented her case against me, painting me as a rebel who thought he was above the rules. Donald Marsh backed her up, talking about the importance of maintaining standards. Patricia Young seemed uncomfortable but said nothing. Then Linda Martinez spoke up. This is absurd. Brandon Foster cleared our streets when the city could not. He helped elderly and disabled residents. He potentially prevented medical emergencies. And we are going to fine him $50,000 for being a good neighbor. He violated the bylaws, Karen insisted. So what? Linda shot back. The bylaws are supposed to serve the community, not punish people for helping. This is exactly the kind of overreach that gives HOAs a bad name. If you cannot support board decisions, perhaps you should resign, Karen said icily. Perhaps you should, Linder retorted. The meeting ended with no resolution, but the fine stood. I received official paperwork demanding payment within 30 days or face legal action. Christmas came and went in a blur of stress and worry. I consulted with Michael multiple times, building a case for arbitration. He filed a formal complaint against the HOA, arguing that the fines were excessive, punitive, and violated the spirit of community association governance. Meanwhile, the neighborhood was watching. People started a petition to remove Karen from the HOA board. Within a week, over 40 of the 63 homes in Pinewood Heights had signed it. But according to the bylaws, removing a board member required a vote at the annual meeting, which was not until March. January brought more snow. Storm after storm, each one dumping 12 to 20 inches. And each time I kept my snowplow off my truck. I was facing a lawsuit. I could not afford to add more fuel to the fire. The neighborhood suffered again. The city was completely overwhelmed, sometimes taking a week to reach our street. People were furious, not at me, but at the HOA. Karen's house became a target of that anger. Someone wrote "tyrant" in the snow on her lawn. Someone else left a broken shovel on her doorstep. I did not condone any of it, but I understood the frustration. Jessica went into labor on January 15th during another snowstorm. Fortunately, it was early labor, and David was able to get her to the hospital using a neighbor's 4-wheel drive SUV, navigating slowly through barely passable streets. She delivered a healthy baby girl, but David told me later that it had been terrifying, not knowing if they would make it in time. "This is Karen's fault," he said, his voice tight with anger. "If you had been able to keep the streets clear, we would not have been worried." The arbitration hearing was scheduled for February 10th. Michael and I prepared extensively, gathering testimonials from neighbors, documentation of the snow emergencies, photos of the impassable streets, and records of Karen's enforcement actions. The hearing was held in a conference room in Boulder with a neutral arbitrator, Elizabeth Winters, presiding. Karen attended with the HOA's lawyer, a stern man named Robert Garrison. The rest of the board was not present, though their written statements were submitted as evidence. Michael presented our case first. He walked through the timeline, explained how my snowplowing had been a community benefit for years, showed how the sudden enforcement of an obscure bylaw had caused measurable harm to residents, and argued that the fines were excessive and punitive. Then Robert Garrison presented the HOA's case. He argued that bylaws must be enforced consistently, that exceptions create chaos, that property values depend on maintained standards, and that I had willfully violated a clear ruling after being warned multiple times. Karen testified, her voice steady and confident. "Mr. Foster thinks he is above the rules. He has appointed himself as some kind of neighborhood savior, but the reality is that he runs a commercial snow removal business and was using our streets as a base of operations." The board had every right to enforce the bylaws. When it was my turn to testify, I kept my cool. I have never charged anyone in Pinewood Heights for snow removal. Not once. I do it because it needs to be done and because I have the equipment to do it safely and efficiently. The HOA's enforcement of this bylaw has caused real harm to real people, including elderly and disabled residents who depend on clear streets for access to medical care and essential services. The arbitrator asked pointed questions of both sides. She wanted to know why the bylaw had been enforced suddenly after years of non-enforcement. She wanted to know if the HOA had considered the community impact. She wanted to know if I had explored alternatives to keeping the plow attached to my truck. The hearing lasted 4 hours. At the end, Elizabeth Winters said she would issue a written decision within 30 days. Those 30 days were agonizing. Meanwhile, winter continued its assault. February brought another major storm, this one with ice underneath the snow, making conditions even more treacherous. Mrs. Henderson slipped again, and this time she broke her wrist. She was 82 years old, and I felt personally responsible, even though logically I knew it was not my fault. The neighborhood was in open revolt against the HOA. People stopped paying their quarterly dues in protest. Karen sent threatening letters, but nobody cared anymore. The HOA had lost all credibility. Marcus organized a recall effort, gathering signatures to force a special election to remove the entire board. Colorado law allowed this if 25% of homeowners signed a petition. He got 40%. The special election was scheduled for March 1st, just before the regular annual meeting. It was clear that Karen and most of the board were going to be voted out. But Karen refused to resign, clinging to her power with both hands. On February 28th, Elizabeth Winters issued her decision. Michael called me as soon as he received it. "You are not going to believe this," he said, and I could hear the grin in his voice. We won, on every count. The decision was 32 pages long, and it was scathing. Elizabeth Winters found that the HOA had selectively enforced the bylaw, that the fines were excessive and punitive, that the enforcement had caused measurable harm to the community, and that my actions had been taken in good faith to address emergency situations. She ordered the HOA to rescind all fines, issue a formal apology, and amend the bylaws to create a specific exception for snow removal equipment used for community benefit. She also ordered the HOA to pay my legal fees, which totaled over $12,000. I sat in my kitchen, reading the decision 3 times to make sure it was real. I had won. After 4 months of stress and fighting and watching my neighbors suffer, I had actually won, but the victory felt hollow. Mrs. Henderson's wrist was still broken. Jessica had gone through unnecessary stress during her pregnancy. Countless people had missed work, appointments, and important obligations. The neighborhood had been divided and angry for months. The special election on March 1st was a formality. Karen, Donald, Patricia, and Gerald were all voted out by overwhelming margins. Only Linda kept her seat, and she was elected as the new president. 4 new board members were elected, including Marcus. The annual meeting on March 4th was the most well-attended in the neighborhood's history. 52 of 63 homes sent representatives. Linda opened the meeting by formally apologizing on behalf of the HOA for the handling of the Snowplow situation, and announced that the bylaws were being amended immediately. Karen attended, sitting in the back with her arms crossed. When the floor was opened for comments, she stood up. "This neighborhood has no standards anymore," she said, her voice bitter. "You have all chosen convenience over property values, and you will regret it. I resigned from the board because I refuse to be part of this circus." "You were voted out," someone called from the audience. "You did not resign." Karen's face turned red, but she sat down and said nothing else. She left before the meeting ended, and I never saw her at another community gathering again. 6 months later, her house went up for sale, and she moved to a different neighborhood in Boulder. Winter finally began to release its grip in late March. The snow melted, revealing all the damage it had caused: cracked driveways, broken tree limbs, ruined landscaping. But the neighborhood came together to clean up and repair. There was a sense of community that had not existed before, forged through shared hardship and collective action. I kept plowing when it snowed, though the storms were lighter and less frequent as spring approached. The new HOA board formally recognized my contribution at the April meeting, presenting me with a plaque that read, in appreciation for service to the Pinewood Heights community. Mrs. Henderson's wrist healed, though she said it ached when the weather changed. Jessica's baby, little Emma, grew healthy and strong. Marcus and I became closer friends, bonding over the shared experience of fighting the HOA. But the whole experience had taught me something important about power and communities. HOAs are supposed to serve their residents, to make neighborhoods better places to live. But when they become focused on rules for the sake of rules, when they prioritize authority over common sense, they become tyrannical. I learned that standing up for what is right sometimes means taking risks. I learned that communities are stronger when people work together instead of letting petty bureaucrats divide them. And I learned that sometimes you have to fight, even when it is easier to give in. The following winter was milder, but I was ready. My truck sat in the driveway with the snowplow attached, and nobody said a word. The first time it snowed, I cleared the streets just like I always had, and neighbors waved and thanked me, and everything felt right again. One morning in December of that second winter, I was clearing snow from Mrs. Henderson's driveway when she came out with a thermos of hot coffee. "You know, dear," she said, watching me work, "last winter was terrible, but it brought out the best in people." "Well, most people." I laughed, taking the coffee gratefully. "It definitely showed us who our friends were." "It showed us who you are," she corrected. "You could have given in. You could have let us all struggle while you protected yourself, but you did not. You helped us, even when it cost you." I did not know what to say to that, so I just sipped the coffee and got back to work. Linda, the new HOA president, implemented a series of reforms over the following months. The bylaws were rewritten to be clearer and more focused on genuine community concerns rather than arbitrary restrictions. A new appeals process was established so homeowners could challenge board decisions without going straight to expensive arbitration. Monthly meetings became more transparent, with full agendas published in advance and detailed minutes posted online. The neighborhood thrived under the new leadership. Property values actually increased, not because of strict enforcement of arbitrary rules, but because Pinewood Heights became known as a great place to live, with an active, engaged community that took care of its own. I continued running my snow removal business, taking contracts throughout Boulder County. But I never charged anyone in Pinewood Heights. Those driveways and that street I did for free because they were my neighbors and my community. The legal settlement from the HOA covered my legal fees and compensated me for the stress and time lost fighting the case. I used some of that money to upgrade my equipment, buying a newer truck with a better plow system. I donated some of it to a local charity that helped elderly residents with home maintenance, and I kept the arbitrator's decision framed on my wall, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. A reminder that sometimes doing the right thing is hard. Sometimes it costs you money and time and stress. Sometimes you have to stand up to bullies and bureaucrats who think rules are more important than people, but it is always worth it. Michael Richardson became a friend after the case was over. He told me later that the arbitrator's decision had been cited in 3 other HOA cases in Colorado, helping homeowners fight similar abuses of power. My little dispute over a snowplow had created legal precedent that protected other people. That felt good. The years passed, and life in Pinewood Heights settled into a comfortable rhythm. We had normal winters, occasional heavy storms, but nothing like that first terrible season. I plowed when needed. People waved and brought me coffee and cookies, and the HOA focused on actual community improvements like playground equipment and neighborhood watch programs. I ran into Karen one time, 3 years after everything had happened. It was at a grocery store in Boulder, and we both stopped, surprised to see each other. "Brandon," she said stiffly. "Karen." There was an awkward silence. Then she said, "I heard your neighborhood is doing well." "It is. People are happy." Another pause. Then quietly, "I was trying to protect property values. I was trying to maintain standards." I looked at her, this woman who had caused so much unnecessary suffering because she could not see past her own need for control. Part of me wanted to be angry, but mostly I just felt sad. "Standards are good," I said, "but people are more important than rules. Community is more important than property values. I hope you have learned that." She did not respond, just turned and walked away. I never saw her again. Standing in my garage years later, looking at my well-maintained truck with its snowplow attachment gleaming in the light, I thought about everything that had happened. The stress and fear, the long nights worrying about fines and foreclosure, watching my neighbors struggle through that horrible winter. But I also thought about the good that had come from it. The friendships forged, the community strengthened, the reforms that made Pinewood Heights a better place to live. The legal precedent that helped other people fight HOA overreach. The small victory for common sense over bureaucratic tyranny. It had been worth it. Every bit of it, Mrs. Henderson passed away peacefully in her sleep, 4 years after that terrible winter. She was 86, and her daughter told me at the funeral that her mom had talked about me often, about the young man who had stood up for the neighborhood and made sure people could get to doctors and work and school. "She said you were proof that good people still exist," her daughter said, tears in her eyes. "She said you reminded her why she loved this neighborhood." I cried at that funeral, mourning a kind woman who had always had a smile and cookies for the neighborhood kids. But I was also grateful that I had been able to help her, even in small ways during those difficult months. Jessica and David's daughter, Emma, grew into a bright, energetic little girl who loved playing in the snow. Every winter, she would watch from her window as I plowed the street, and she would wave enthusiastically, her small hand pressed against the glass. When she turned 5, she told her parents she wanted to drive a snowplow when she grew up, just like Mr. Foster. David told me this one evening when I was clearing their driveway. "You are her hero," he said, laughing. "She talks about you all the time." It was moments like that that reminded me why I did this, not for recognition or gratitude, though those were nice, but because communities work when people take care of each other. Because we are all in this together, and sometimes you have to be the person who stands up and does what needs to be done. The HOA under Linda's leadership became a model for other neighborhoods. They were featured in a local newspaper article about effective community governance, highlighting their transparent processes and focus on resident well-being over arbitrary enforcement. Other HOAs reached out for advice on reforming their own bylaws and practices. Marcus served on the board for 6 years before moving to Denver for a job opportunity. Before he left, he told me that fighting the HOA together had been one of the defining experiences of his life. "I always thought I was the kind of person who would stand up for what is right," he said. "But until that winter, I had never really been tested. Watching you refuse to back down, even when it could have cost you everything, that taught me something. It taught me that courage is not about being fearless. It is about being afraid and doing the right thing anyway." We stayed in touch after he moved, exchanging emails and occasional phone calls. He told his new neighbors about the snowplow fight, and it became a story he shared when explaining why community engagement matters. I am still living in Pinewood Heights, still running my snow removal business, still plowing the neighborhood streets when winter comes. My truck is older now, with more miles on it, but it runs strong and the plow attachment is as reliable as ever. The neighborhood has changed over the years. New families have moved in, young couples with babies and toddlers, retirees looking for a quiet community in the mountains. They all hear the story eventually, about the winter the HOA banned the snowplow and how the neighborhood fought back. Some of them do not believe it at first. They cannot imagine an HOA being that petty, that blind to common sense. But the old-timers confirm it, and the story has become part of the neighborhood's identity. It is a reminder of what can happen when bureaucracy runs amok, and what is possible when a community comes together. I still have the framed arbitrator's decision on my wall. Below it, I hung the plaque the HOA gave me. And next to those, there is a photo from that terrible winter, showing our street buried under 3 feet of snow, completely impassable. I keep it as a reminder of what we overcame and why it mattered. Sometimes on quiet winter mornings, when the snow is falling softly and the world is peaceful, I sit in my truck before starting the plow, and I think about everything that happened. The fear and stress, the anger and frustration, but also the solidarity and determination and eventual triumph. I think about Karen wherever she is, and I hope she learned something from the experience. I hope she understands now that rules exist to serve people, not the other way around. But even if she does not, even if she is still out there somewhere, wielding her clipboard like a weapon and making people's lives harder in the name of standards, at least I know that we stopped her here. We protected our community. We stood up for what was right. And we made Pinewood Heights a better place because of it. That is worth more than all the property values in the world. The sun is rising now, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of pink and gold. Another winter day in Colorado, another chance to help my neighbors, another opportunity to be part of something bigger than myself. I start the truck, feeling the familiar rumble of the engine, and head out to clear the streets. Because that is what we do here in Pinewood Heights. We take care of each other. We stand together against those who would put rules above people. And we never forget that communities are built not by bylaws and restrictions, but by the simple act of helping your neighbor when they need it most. The snowplow cuts through the fresh powder, leaving clear paths behind me, and I think about all the people who will use these streets today. People going to work, kids going to school, elderly residents going to the doctor. All of them able to live their lives because someone cared enough to clear the way. That is all I ever wanted to do. Clear the way. Make things a little easier for the people around me. Stand up for what is right when others tried to make it wrong. And in the end, despite everything Karen and the old HOA board tried to do, despite the fines and threats and legal battles, we won. Not just in arbitration, but in the way that really matters. We won because our community is stronger, kinder, and more united than ever before. We won because we remembered that being neighbors means more than living near each other. It means taking care of each other, especially when times are hard. We won because we refused to let bureaucratic tyranny destroy what makes a neighborhood great. People helping people. No questions asked, no compensation required. And as I finish clearing the last section of street and head back home, the sun fully risen now, the neighborhood waking up to cleared roads and safe passage, I know that every bit of struggle was worth it. Because this, right here, this is what community is supposed to be. And no HOA board, no matter how petty or power-hungry, can ever take that away from us.